Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board. The Rio Grande Basin received some rain inflows this weekend, and that has brought natural river flows higher in recent days. MRGCD started to release from its San Juan Chama storage water on July 30th, when native flows on the river were not enough to meet agricultural and conveyance demand. Native water that is generated within the Rio Grande Basin and is subject to the rules of the Rio Grande Compact. San Juan Chama water is water that is imported from the San Juan Basin and not subject to the rules of the Rio Grande Compact. MRGCD was unable to access its stored San Juan Chama water when flows were low in mid-July because of restrictions on releases from Abiquiu Dam, and that was due to some channel conditions downstream of Abiquiu Dam. So we were limited to just what native flow was coming in. But conditions on the Chama have improved downstream of Abiquiu enough to allow MRGCD to release up to 600 CFS out of Abiquiu. MRGCD only has its 2024 San Juan Chama water available for storage this year because there are Rio Grande Compact restrictions on storage of native water in New Mexico. But rain inflows this weekend have helped to reduce how much water MRGCD needs to release to meet the agricultural and conveyance demand of the Middle Valley, which will help make the small amount of storage water we have last longer than my initial estimate. I now think that MRGCD will have released all of its available San Juan Chama water by the end of August, and before I was estimating about mid-August. So I think we'll make it a little longer. I have a hydrograph of the La Puente gauge on the Chama, which measures native Rio Grande inflows upstream of the Chama reservoirs. Flows here have been at or below 100 CFS for much of the past month, but rains have brought native flows higher, which have helped to reduce what MRGCD needs to release from storage. The next hydrograph I have is the Embudo gauge on the Rio Grande, which measures native Rio Grande flows upstream of the confluence with the Rio Chama. Flows on the main stem have recovered this past week after hovering below 300 CFS in early August. Increases in flows at this gauge can also help MRGCD reduce what it releases from storage and make our available San Juan Chama water last a little bit longer. The last hydrograph I have is the Odawi gauge on the Rio Grande, and that's just upstream of Cochiti Dam, and that measures both native Rio Grande water and San Juan Chama water and that's San Juan Chama releases from MRGCD and other agencies. This gauge is a good indication of how much water is going to be entering the Middle Valley below Abiquiu or below Cochiti, and flows did go below 400 CFS in mid-July when we saw it at the Odawi gauge, and that was when we saw those restrictions on the Chama. Today, releases from Cochiti Dam are about 700 cubic feet per second. With rain inflows this weekend, most of this water is native Rio Grande, but last week, before we saw those rain inflows, MRGCD San Juan Chama water was comprising about 60% of what was coming into the Middle Valley. If there are not more rain inflows, the river will continue to trend downward, the native flows will, and MRGCD will again have to increase its releases from storage. And again, we'll probably be making up a majority of what we're seeing and come into the Middle Valley if we don't see more rain inflows. The Bureau of Reclamation is also releasing 40 CFS of its San Juan Chama water, and that's to support river flows for environmental purposes through the Middle Valley. Once MRGCD has released all of its San Juan Chama water, MRGCD will be a run of the river system, and we will not be able to augment what the river is naturally producing, which without rain inflows might not be enough to meet the needs of Middle Valley farmers. After August, farmers should expect extended periods between irrigation deliveries. If there's not enough native Rio Grande water entering the Middle Valley to meet the needs of prior and paramount lands, we may have to go into PMP only operations, which means farmers north of Isleta Pueblo will be curtailed to ensure the Pueblos are receiving enough water to satisfy their priority right. Moving on to the forecast, the National Weather Service forecast is calling for hot weather, but there are some chances for rain. And the Climate Prediction Center's 3-month outlook, going on to the next slide, it's calling for a higher potential for above average temperatures and below average precipitation. And that's through October. As a follow-up to last month's board meeting, there were a number of questions about the Rio Grande Compact, and I have some graphs that I would like to share with the board and address the individual questions that were asked at the last meeting. The first graph is the cumulative New Mexico Rio Grande Compact delivery departures. So essentially, it just tracks New Mexico's Rio Grande Compact status through time. New Mexico's current debt is 121,500 acre feet. In the past 80 years, New Mexico has been in compact debt 46 of those years. So since 1940, New Mexico has been in compact debt 46 years. The next graph is annual over or under delivery. So this is how much we deliver in any departure from what we were supposed to deliver in any given year. The largest departure New Mexico has ever seen was in 1952, and that was we under-delivered 120,000 acre feet in that 1 year. So it's the size of our current debt. The final graph shows New Mexico's Rio Grande compact delivery obligation relative to the flows of the O2A index gauge. And if you guys have any questions about that later, I'm happy to spend some time discussing any of these graphs. But with that, I don't have any more updates.